Let's stand together as we sing this morning. So glad you're here. Sing to our God who is both the lion and the lamb. He's coming on the clouds. Kings and kingdoms will bow. Every chain will break.
thankful that you're here with us this morning. If you are here with us in the room, if you are watching online, welcome. We're so thankful that you're here. Normally, I get up here and I talk for probably too long about all the exciting things we have going on around here, and I'm going to do that a little bit, but mostly I want you to hear from someone else this morning. So first things first, though, I want to draw attention to the Connect cards on your seat. Okay, so no matter whether this is your first time, if you've been here a million times, fill that out. We want to connect with you. We want to know how we can be praying for you. And here's the fun thing. Whether it's your first time or whether you've been here a whole bunch, you can fill that out and you can take it over to the connection desk. And my friend Katie is going to be over there. And Katie, yes, hello, Katie. And Katie is fantastic. So even if you just haven't met Katie yet, you should go talk to her. And there may be some ways that you can get connected in our community. We would love for you to do that. And then Billy, who happens to be Katie's husband, is going to be over here after service. And he would like to pray for you. So you can write those prayer requests on your Connect card. We're going to pray over those on Tuesday. We do that every single week as the staff. We pray over every request in this community. But also, if you would like prayer right here in this room, Billy's going to be over there, and he would love to pray with you. Okay, so another way to stay connected around here. So the Connect card, fill that out. We'll get in touch with you. But there's also this nifty thing called our app, our Restoration Church app. Now, that is where you're going to be able to stay connected to all sorts of events, like, for example, the block party that's coming up that I know is on all of your calendars already, right? Yes. So what I want you to do is I want you to download that app, because that's where we're going to really be pushing a lot of our events, and the information that you'll need for those, and time, place, all of that, it's all going to be in there. And if you're like, I don't know how to download an app, I recently learned how to do that, guys, because I'm not tech savvy at all. So I can show you now how to do it after service. So come bring your phone to me after service. I'll help you make sure our app is on there. We'll get your account created. It's a great way to kind of just stay up to date on lots of things that we have going on here, like the block party. Hint, hint. There's a block party on November 13th that you can go in the app and you can figure all that out, and we would love for you to join us for that. But most importantly, I want you to hear from my friend Krista. So I'm going to invite Krista to come up here and join me. We've been talking about, yes, clap for Krista. Love that. Awesome. So as you know, we've been super excited to have Better Together back with us here in our gathering. If you were around our Give Back offering, you got to meet Krista. We were there. We got to partner with them in a really cool way. We also got to host this amazing job fair, which was in partnership with Better Together. But today I'm super excited for you to hear about another program they have specifically for their families. And so Krista, if you could share with us a little bit about who you are, you know, why you exist, how we can get involved, right? Because there's always a why, right? There's a why we exist, and we need to go after it. So the why you exist, and then how we can get involved in kind of next steps for us. We'd love to hear that.
Well, that's a loaded question, why I exist, right? And why Better Together exists. But I didn't really know why I was called to Florida from Wisconsin 8 years ago. Yesterday, actually, on the day. But a few years ago was on my heart. To just get more involved with the community's children that needed love. So that started a journey of becoming licensed foster care. And if some of you were here early, you saw a little girl with me, and that little girl was a little bit of a detour on that journey of becoming a foster parent. I was with Door of Hope being licensed. Billy and Katie are well aware of Door of Hope. And it just kind of paused it for a minute, because her mama came to me at 18 and pregnant. And through the church, we were connected. I didn't know her, she didn't know me, but she just needed somebody. She needed a safe home and just a neighbor, helping neighbor. And through the church, we were able to do that. Was supposed to be a weekend, but it turned into several months, and they are now on their own doing wonderful and just moving mountains with a little bit of time that they were given to just kind of get reset, feel loved, known, and ultimately get to know Christ. Because at the end of the day, we can do everything in our power to help our neighbor. We can give them a meal, we can give them a job, but if we don't share Christ, we're kind of missing it. So that's kind of my story. I mean, there's a whole lot more, but I would love to share more with you if you have time. But Better Together, through that journey of becoming a foster parent, I just got to thinking of if we could do more of the prevention part of it and just loving them before they get to that point. Because there always was a point at somewhere that they turned, right? Their direction radically changed direction at some point. So if we can get them there, whether it's a job loss or a medical emergency that left them without help with their kids, you know, and that's the only option is to go this way. For those parents that want to do better, that want to keep their kiddos, there are other options. And Better Together is now here in Pinellas Pasco and kind of Hillsborough. We're growing in that area, but from Southwest Florida. So we were birthed out down there about 5-6 years ago, and it equips the church to be the church, whether it's hosting a child or children for a couple weeks, couple months, max of 90 days. Average stay is 41 days. We could be a family advocate, which is another word for a mentor. That is 3 to 6 month commitment to walk alongside these parents of saying, let's walk through that budget. So you got this new job. How do you budget that money so you keep that home for a sustainable amount of time to keep your kiddos with you? Our ultimate goal is to keep our families together, and even bigger than that, whether it is, we just want them to be in a Christian home, whether it is preventative, whether it is foster care, whether it's adoptive care, we just want them to be in a Christian home. So this is just another piece of the puzzle where we're linking arms with other agencies in the area and just saying, you know what? As a church body, we are called to do something. whether you're called to host, whether you're called to be a job advocate or a job coach like you witnessed earlier this year, whether you're called to just be support, bring a meal, bring diapers, help that host family that is called to host those kiddos, support them, offer babysitting service or help with transportation or just showing up to say, hey, I'm here to watch the kids while you do laundry, just get that little bit of a break. So while you're not called to do every single one of those items or maybe the most of the host family, but you're called to do something. So I encourage you to kind of pray about it, listen to your heart, see what God's stirring, chat with me afterward. We're going to have a brief interest meeting after this service and then a training next Saturday and kind of go from there and just see what is on y'all's hearts and be the church to meet the radical change in this county and beyond, because we know that the numbers are huge here. If you turn any news channel or any social media site, they're always wanting more and more foster homes, and we love that. We're always going to know that there's foster care needed. But for those families that just need community and to avoid the crisis and the trauma and the abuse, then we're here to help you do that. So talk to me afterward. Is that it? Did I answer all your questions?
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, I am so excited about our opportunity to continue to partner with Better Together, and I know from personal experience that Krista is just the best, so you should go get to know her regardless and go learn some more about Better Together and the ways that you can partner no matter what that looks like, right? She listed off a lot of ways you can get involved, whether you're a host family, whether you're supporting a host family. So I'd really encourage you to go get some information, and then if you can, join us for that training on Saturday. So we're super excited that you're here with us this morning. We're going to continue with our series. And before we do that, though, we're going to take a moment and we're going to say hi to each other. So stand up, talk to some friends, and we'll get going to service.
Good morning. Glad you're here this morning as we continue this series together. And yeah, I love that this time happens, that you guys get to chat, and there's all that I love that. So we love seeing that happen. For me, I don't know, there's this thing in the South that I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's the Southern hospitality. And we kind of want to lean into that as a church, something we really enjoy. And I had some friends that visited from the Pacific Northwest not that long ago. And they came down here and they wanted to eat food that was like Florida food. And I know that seafood's the thing. I get that. But when you're in the South, if you've ever lived in the Pacific Northwest, you know something that they miss there. And there's a lot of people, I'm just going to say it, I think there's a correlation, because in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of places that don't know Jesus very well. There's also a lot of places that don't have barbecue. And I think the two may be connected. I'm not saying it's a perfect match. I'm just saying there's correlation, maybe not causation, but correlation there of the two happening, that they don't have much barbecue. So we had some friends come down, they were like, we want to have barbecue, and I was like, perfect, because I could eat barbecue all day. And so we went to this place, it was a local joint, I'm not going to say the name of it, we went to this local place, and I was like, this is going to be great. We go in, and the place is one of those places where it is just kind of always overcrowded, right? It's like always going to have too many people in it, and just too much going on. And it's one of those places that's just always loud. It's like overly loud inside of this place. And it's one of those places where everything is perpetually in a hurry state of mode. Everybody's moving quickly. Everything's happening very fast, right? You know this type of place, right? We go in, it's like just very loud, very overwhelming, lots of activity. And as we went into it, I was thinking, well, we're not going to be here probably long, but we sit down and they give us this big table. We have the biggest table in the place, and we're sitting there and we're talking, and the service was great. People were very kind. I was like, here's this Southern hospitality that I was going to tell them about. I'm seeing they're very nice. They're very sweet to us. They're doing a great job, and they keep bringing food out, and they keep everything's on time. There's full drinks the whole time. Everything's going great. And then at the very end, we're sitting there for just a few extra seconds, just talking a little bit more. And a person comes over, and they're very nice, and they tap on the table, and they're like, I'm sorry, we need you to get up and leave, because there's all these other people waiting. And we were like, oh, no problem. That's on us, And so we get up and we leave. And as soon as we walk out, I remember my friend, he whispers to me, he's like, so much for that Southern hospitality, huh? Now, it's amazing that everything was right. Everything was going good. But here's the thing. Hospitality and hurry cannot coexist. You can't have both at the same time. You cannot have hospitality and hurry in the same room at the same time. Everything else can go really well. Does not mean that you have hospitality, because hospitality and hurry do not coexist. And here's the thing, what I want to talk about today that's a little different than what we've been doing in this series so far, is for most of the series we've been talking about being here for now. That we believe that you are here for a purpose, on purpose, that there is a reason that you exist and that you live right now in the exact place that you're in. I believe that. We've been talking about it physically. Today I want to talk about it emotionally, because it's a lot harder sometimes to be here now emotionally and psychologically and even spiritually than it is to be physically. Physically, you just showed up. Like, you had nothing to do with it. As Janessa asked earlier, how'd you get here? And really the answer for all of us is like, I had actually nothing to do with that. I just, my parents, they met and there was a thing, and then I'm here. Like, we have nothing to do with that decision. But here we are, you're here, and maybe you made decisions to get to this place. Maybe you chose to be here, and that's great in some way or another. But the reality is, no matter if you chose to live here and now, you still have a choice to actually be here and now. To actually be present, to actually be here in a place where things are not overcrowded, in a place where there's not just perpetual noise, in a place where there's not just constant hurry, to actually be here and be here now. And this is much harder for us than showing up somewhere physically is actually showing up somewhere emotionally, or showing up somewhere spiritually, or showing up somewhere psychologically. That's much harder for us in our society, isn't it? Sure. I mean, you're here now, and some of you are thinking about the other places you could be, or you should be, or the other things you have going on after this, right? Some of you have phones on or watches on that are reminding you of the outside world at this exact moment. That's the way we're wired. That's the world we live in. And this is much more difficult to show up, to actually be here right now, to be fully present in the place we're in. That's what hospitality is. If you're a note taker, just write this down really quickly. But I would say that hospitality is the gift. It's the gift of time and presence. More than anything else, right? That's what hospitality is. When somebody gives you their time, and there's no like end to that time. There's no like set time where somebody has to come over to the table and say, you need to move. Right? Like, that's what it feels like. When somebody is fully present with you, that's hospitality. When they're not thinking about where else they could be at that moment, but when they're showing up to the moment that you're in with you at that moment, that's what hospitality really looks like. And it's central. We're going to get into this in a second, but it's central to the gospel message. Believe it or not, I know it sounds very simple, but hospitality is central to the gospel message. I think it's much harder for us because we live in such an age and such a world of distraction. Right? We live in this world where we're constantly pulled in a lot of different ways at all different times. This is the way our world wants it to be. Again, it's a thing called the attention economy. This is the economy we live in today. The economy we live in is no longer a world of just money. Money doesn't do it for companies. Companies don't want your money. What they want is they want your attention. It has really changed. It's really shifted in our society. No longer do they just want your money. Money's not actually interesting, which some of us would agree with. Some of us, just by the way, think about it for just a quick second. If I said, hey, I want you to show up to this thing and I need your help for something for like 10 hours. Some of you, if I said that to you about, I need help moving. Yeah, right? And some of you are thinking immediately, can I just hire movers for you? I'll just pay the money. I don't want to show up and do that. I will pay for that to happen, right? Money is actually secondary in our economy. You know what's number one? Time. Time is actually number one. Your attention, where you're thinking, where your hospitality is, your time and your presence, where those things are, that's the number one thing in our economy today. There's a million books written about it. One that's great is called How to Do Nothing by a gal named Jenny Odell, and it's a fantastic read in a lot of ways because she's just talking about how to combat the idea of living in the attention economy. And we've all seen this, right? We all know, if you haven't been following, the news over the last couple of weeks, we look at what's happening in Facebook and what we've seen with social media and places that are literally targeting our attention, and they're trying to actually stir up controversy to keep our attention. That's what they're doing. That's the economy they live in. If they keep our attention, they keep everything else with it. And we live in a world where that's the hardest thing right now. It's so hard for us. And I blame Sesame Street. Anybody else grow up watching Sesame Street? Am I the only one? Okay. So Sesame Street in the 70s, when they were really getting going, Jim Henson hired another guy, And this other fellow came in, and what he did was he designed a thing called the distractor. Now, they had a character later called Donnie the Distractor, who was played by Gilbert Gottfried, which, talk about distracting, that would be miserable to have to hear Gilbert Gottfried say anything to your children, right? Like, it's when people probably started stopping watching Sesame Street. But, like, they had an actual thing called the distractor, and if you read, like, Gladwell's Tipping Point, he talks about this quite a bit. But if you notice what would happen in Sesame Street, they would keep their segments to a certain length of time. All the segments come down to a certain length of time, and they would blend a human with a puppet, usually. You had these two things. And the reason they do that is because they actually had a method called the distractor. And they would sit kids in a room, and they would put their Sesame Street clips on a screen. But right next to that screen, they had a thing called the distractor. And it was just a slideshow that would flip about every 20 seconds to a new image. And they would literally watch children's eyes to see if the kids stayed with the show or if they moved to the distractor. See, here's the thing. We've been growing up in a world where they knew, that everybody has known, even Sesame Street, who was on a public broadcasting station. They weren't even like in this for huge amounts of money at that moment, that your attention is so valuable and it can be taken away so easily, right? And they were literally trying to figure out, how long does a segment need to be? Is this holding kids' attention? What music do we need to have? Do we need to not have music? What adult can we put with a puppet to keep your attention in these scenes? And it's been happening ever since then. And since that day, people still have distractors as they teach and as they learn, as they have these focus groups with any show out there. And for us, we've been growing up in this, watching these things because people know how important our attention is. And Sesame Street knew it's probably only going to get worse as we grow up. Like, that was when we were kids. How much did we really have to be distracted by? Like, we didn't have like important things really in our lives. We were either, for me, it was either the TV situation or it was food. And that was the other thing I was thinking about a lot, was like, how do I get more food? Those were the two things on my mind. There wasn't much else going on. Think about it today with all the things that are just sitting in your back pocket at all times. We live in an attention economy, and being here now, showing true hospitality without hurry, is so hard to do. But it's critical. It's central to the gospel message. So we're going to pick up in Luke chapter 10. If you have a Bible with you, I'd encourage you to go there. If you don't have a Bible with you, does anybody need a Bible? We have Bibles if you'd like a Bible. I'd love for you to follow along with me if you can. So if you have your phone, or you have, or if you need a Bible, let us know. Just raise your hand and Janessa will grab one for you. But Luke chapter 10, I would love for you to follow along. Now, last week we looked at the story of the Good Samaritan. It starts in verse 25. And we started with this story of actually hospitality. And what we're going to see is that this story is really intricately linked to the next story. Sometimes we miss this when we read it. Now, if you go to Matthew chapter 10, verse 25, Luke chapter 10, verse 25, go there with me. And what you'll see is, as we start the story, again, verse 25, it says this: on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Now, that on one occasion is it's like a story break in Luke. Like, he does this a few times, where when Luke is writing, and we're going to go through a whole series in Luke after this series. The next series we're doing is literally through the entire book of Luke. So I'd encourage you to be here for that whole thing, because it's fascinating. What Luke's doing here, he really sets up these paragraph and story breaks. And on this one, this is the beginning of a whole new story. It's like he starts a whole new thought. And I don't know who did the paragraphs and verse breakdown in these books. It really bothers me. It's a real problem. I know you guys have other things to worry about in your lives, but I'm not exaggerating when I say it's like kept me up at night, because I'm like, why did they stop there? Why would they do this? This is a bad spot to start and stop a story. They really should have just put a whole new paragraph down. Again, I have very little going on in my life. This really bothers me, but they should have started a new paragraph, a new chapter here, but they just started a new paragraph, and it says this: on one occasion. Now, this is the beginning of a new thought. And from here on, we're going to see one cohesive thought, okay? So follow me. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, just really quickly, if you notice that commandment, which is the most important commandments in the entire Bible, we know that, right? Jesus clearly says these are the most important commandments in the entire Bible. I just want you to think about this for just a quick second. Notice how little room there is for distraction towards anything else. If you're loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, so all of your mental capacity, all of your emotional capacity, all of your spiritual capacity, all of your physical capacity, if all those things are being pointed in the same direction, what room is there left for distraction? And then even the other people come into this because now you love your neighbor as you love yourself, which is you are now loved because you're loved by God. So there's this whole thing happening here. And for us to see this, I don't see any extra room. I don't see a lot of room for distraction because every ounce of us is focused in the right direction, right? This is the commandment. This is why every night I pray this, called the Shema, this prayer, this love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength. Every Jew would have prayed this twice a day. I still prayed over my kids every single night because that's my hope, is that if we're focused on those things, everything else falls in place, right? Everything else comes together if we have these things in order. So the answer is there. Again, easy answer. The guy aces the test. And then Jesus says, what do you think? And the guy says, this is what I think. And Jesus says, great, you did it. You have answered correctly. Verse 28. Jesus replied, do this and you will live. Again, not just in the future tense of someday you're going to live when there's heaven or whatever you think of in the future. He's saying you'll live now if you do that. If you can find that space, if you can actually live that kind of life, you will live right now. You will have that kind of life. But he wanted to justify himself. Again, that never goes well. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Now, again, if you missed this last week, go back and watch it because we went through this whole thing. We're not going to spend a lot of time. We're going to skim through real quickly. So I want you to see how these two things go together. Who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus doesn't answer him with a straight answer. He says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And you could just probably feel the whole room just kind of collapse. It was like, oh, here we go. Here comes a story. Right? And so a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. When he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, went away, leaving him half dead. Again, go back and watch this because this whole thing is probably not a parable. It's probably a true story. Priest happened to be going down the same road. Now, notice this real quickly. We just saw that he was going down. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now we see in verse 31, a priest happened to be going down the same road. When he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came to the same place, saw him and passed by on the other side. Now these words really matter. Passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, another word here, that's this moving word, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him, which would have been in reverse. The Samaritan shouldn't be taking pity on this man should be taking pity on the Samaritan. That's how this worked. Yet the Samaritan does it. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey. He took him to an inn and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Now, notice in this story, notice that this is the whole thing is really the gift of presence and time. That's the main gift that this guy gives, right? There's a hospitality happening here. There's something in this man's life, in this Samaritan's life, where he is not overly crowded in his schedule, where his life is not just fully noisy and there's all these other things in the back of his mind. He's in a place where he's not overly hurried or just completely hurried in everything he's doing. He's taking his time, giving his presence. And so he is now showing hospitality. Remember what Jesus asks at the end. He says, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Notice again, remember Jesus is identifying himself as the man on the ground. Jesus is saying, I'm not the priest, I'm not the Levite, I'm not the Samaritan even. I'm the man on the ground. That's who I identify with. Who was the man who fell into the hands of robbers? That's who I am. We've read through that in Matthew chapter 25. Now the question in this story could be, so then we know where Jesus is. Where's Jesus in the story? Jesus is the man on the ground. The question then is, where are we in the story? Right? So are we the priest? And more often than not? Are we the Levite more often than not? Or are we the Samaritan? Because Jesus already took the guy on the ground part. So where do we fit in? If we're doing casting, I'm going to guess most of us from the priest or Levite camp. Now, we think we're the Samaritan. We like to believe that. But most often we're not. I don't know if we've talked about it before, but there's a great study that you can go read about in the 70s that was about this exact thing. Princeton Theological Seminary had a bunch of people who were training up to become pastors and priests and people who were missionaries and theologians. Princeton's one of the most prestigious universities for people who are going into theology. And so they took all these students and they did an experiment with them. They sat them down. They said, why do you want to go into ministry? What makes you want to do this? And without question, every single person in that room was like, well, because I want to help people. I think I can help the world and I can do good things. And they're like, that's great. Good for you. And so they said, well, here's what you're going to do. You're going to write a sermon on the Good Samaritan. That's what you're going to do. And then you need to get across campus and present that sermon. Now, they took 3 groups of people, and they told them that they each had different amounts of time to prepare the sermon and to get across campus to present the sermon to their professors. They said, you've got a different amount of time. So some people, they only gave 10 minutes. Some people, they gave 20 minutes. Some people, they gave up to an hour. And they had 3 different groups, and they said, now you have to get your sermon written across campus to present it. And in between those 2 places, they stationed a guy who was an actor who was literally, like, he looked cut up and beaten up. He was coughing and wheezing, laying on the ground between those 2 places. And they watched how many of these seminarians who wanted to help the world were going to cross this place, and they were going to help this man, and how many were not. Of the people who had quite a bit of time, they had about 63% of these students stop and at least check on the man. Now, the group that was a little bit less time, that only had about 20 minutes, that group, they had about 40% that stopped and checked on the man. The group that only had this 10 minutes, this group with very little time, only 10% of the students stopped to even check on the man. In fact, they literally had video of students walking across campus and stepping directly over the man on their way to go present a sermon about the Good Samaritan, which is pretty great, right? So we all think that we're going to be that person, but the reality is we're not that person. The reality is, as life gets crowded, as life gets noisy, as life starts to feel hurried, we are not that person anymore. We just aren't. It's the number one killer to hospitality is hurry. That's what happens here. And we all think that we're the Samaritan or we're probably going to be that person, but the reality is we're probably not, especially the fuller our lives get with things. The more hurried we're going to become, the less hospitable we're going to be. But this story is actually all about that. And what we're going to see is, if you continue to follow this, so follow me just for a second, verse 37. The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Then Jesus says, go and do likewise. You go do what he did, right? Now, he's not just speaking to this one man. He's speaking to everybody in this crowd. You go do what he did. Now, Luke does this thing sometimes in the book of Luke where he tells us a parable or a story, and then he plays the story out. So, for instance, in another part of Luke, just follow me for a quick second, it's a little tangent, but another part of Luke, what we see is there's a moment where Jesus tells a parable about a priest or a Pharisee, a religious ruler who's very wealthy, going into a temple. And he talks about that man going into the temple and then a tax collector who is a sinner going into the same temple. And they both are in the temple, and the tax collector beats his chest and says, I'm so sorry, and woe is me. While the priest or this Pharisee who's wealthy says, I'm so glad I'm not the tax collector. This parable plays out in a parable form. The next verses, if you follow what's happening in Luke, is Jesus has 2 encounters. One with a guy we call the rich young ruler, who is very proud of his status, and one with a guy called Zacchaeus, who ends up being a tax collector and at the end of his time saying, woe is me, and asking for forgiveness. Do you see what's happening? There's this parable, then they play it out. I think that's what Luke's doing here. Go and do likewise, let me show you how. Because the next verse, if you follow, so in your Bible, there's a little break, again, in the paragraphs and in the sentence structure. There's a little break that you might say at the home of Mary and Martha or something about Mary and Martha, and there's this little scene break. And that's fine, but again, remember in the original text, that was not there. It just went from one to the next. That was not there. That got added much later. That got added only a couple hundred years ago. So that little moment right there is very important, that we see the next thing become this same piece, because what happens, it says this: as Jesus and his disciples were on their way. Now, here's the thing. On their way is the word hada in Greek, hada. It's almost like, it's like, what's that? That's not the lady on the Today Show, is it, or whatever? No, Hoda. It's a Hoda. It's like that, similar to Hoda, but hada. And hada is the word road, is actually where the word road comes from in the Greek. The hada was going from one place to the next. And what happened in the story before this, just so you know, it actually showed up 3 different times. It showed up when it said that there was a man who was hada down the road. There was a man who was going, then he gets beaten up by robbers. Then it says a priest, hada, he happened to be going down that same road, and he doesn't show any compassion or sympathy or any hospitality to this man. Then it talks about the Levite, but then the third person is there came a Samaritan who hada, he happened to be going down the same way. Do you see what's happening here? I believe there's a literary link here that Luke is putting in place, saying, now let me show you what it looks like to hada, to go down the road, to see what's happening and what this traveling is like. And it says that Jesus, remember, the man who identified as the guy on the ground, now needs a place to stay. He's now in need of hospitality. Jesus, if you recall, doesn't own a house. He doesn't have any money. In fact, again, remember in the New Testament, he's asked for money 2 times. Both times he says, I have none. He needs hospitality. He's the guy on the ground. And it says that as he hadad down their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She shows this hospitality. That there's going to be these sisters there. It's very interesting that there are women who own a home on their own. That's a whole other conversation. Very interesting that they have a place. These are 2 women who financed a lot of Jesus' ministry. And they have a place where Jesus can stay. They show hospitality. We're going to get into who shows and how this works, how hospitality works in just a second. But let me just tell you, this verse and this idea became so central to the gospel. Became so important to the gospel, this idea of hospitality. In fact, what we see is in the year 300, so after Jesus has left the earth, 300 years of the church, in Rome, there comes a moment where there's a bishop in Constantinople who actually puts out a decree to all of the Christians in the area. And he sees an opportunity in Rome to spread the gospel. Now, if you know anything about Rome and what Rome had that we still use today, there's 2 things that we really borrow from as Americans from Rome. First is our law. Much of our law comes from Rome. That's our biggest thing. Our legal system really revolves around the Roman way. But secondly is our roads. Our roads were actually devised like that was who devised roads, was Rome. They were the first. Go sit through the Epcot ball. They'll tell you about it. Right? They tell you about how the roads were the first World Wide Web. Is that Dame Judi Dench who talks in those? Anyways, there's somebody with a beautiful British accent that will tell you about those roads. And so like you go through, these roads were like the first thing, and somebody saw this Archbishop of Constantinople, he saw an opportunity here. And what he said is he actually sent out a decree to the Christians in the area, and he said, I want you to build a Christ room in your house. And he said, have a bed and a candlestick and a table. That's all it said. Like, so you could just literally go to like the IKEA version of this and just, you have to put it together yourself, but it's super cheap and you won't be able to pronounce the name of any of it. But the meatballs, guys, right? And so he was like, just have this little hospitality room, he called it a Christ room. It was a literal place where there was a space, an actual space created in your life for people who were traveling. And it works so well that actually by the year 362, we see a letter sent by the emperor at the time of Rome. His name was Julian. And there's a really great book called He Welcomed Me In about this. And anyways, they take the letter and they actually write, you can find the letter in this book. And there's a letter written by Emperor Julian to all of his people in Rome saying, I want you guys to make rooms in your houses and with a bed and a table and a candle for the Romans, because he said the atheists, talking about Christians because they didn't believe in the Roman gods. He called them atheists because they were atheists towards the gods of Rome. And he said the atheists are becoming too favorably seen. See, the Christians were actually starting to make this impact in Rome. And Romans were getting nervous about it. It's interesting because that guy, Julian, he wrote that, and just 8 years later, in the city where he wrote that, a Christian monk created the very first hospital in the name of Christ in that same city. Notice the word hospital. Where does that word come from? Hospitality. Same word. He created a hospital showing even more compassion, saying, I can do even more. I will create a space that has even more hospitality than you know what to do with. I'll create this place that has full presence and time for people. And it actually went so far, if you read the book like the Benedict Option or things like that, you'll find that we even see it happen after Rome fell, which this is where I think this comes into play for us today. Rome falls eventually, right? In 482, Rome falls, and we see this whole departure from the Roman way. And Christians have to figure out how they live in that society. How do you live in a place that used to be Christian? Rome at this point was a Christian nation. And suddenly it's not a Christian nation anymore. There is no nation. It's been overtaken by literal barbarians. They had to figure out, how do we live? And this Saint Benedict, he created a monastery. And in this monastery, he wanted to preserve a way of life. And so he created a place that was for the monks to go and pray and fast and stay on their own track. However, one of their number one values was hospitality, that any stranger who came in, no matter where they were from, what their background was, would be treated with hospitality. And so they created rooms where you could have food, rooms where you could sit and you could talk. They created beer. And some of you are like, I want to be part of hospitality now. I'm really interested in hospitality suddenly. I love hospitality more than ever. They actually created that for people coming in. That, just so you know, monks did create that. You can say what you want, it's just a fact. So they created this like an actual place for people to have these conversations. They wanted to give the gift of time and presence, and it turned the tide for them. And I think it's what turns the tide for Christians in the church today, is the gift of presence and time. But the problem is we live in a world that is incongruent with that, right? And many of our lives are incongruent with that. Many of us have lives that are overpacked, like that restaurant. Many of us have lives that are just perpetually hurried. Many of us have lives that are constantly noisy. And we're not the only ones. What we're going to see in this story is Jesus is experiencing hospitality. He's Hadad, sorry, not Hoda from the Today Show, Hadad, down the road. And now he is the one in this place of being served with hospitality. He's going to show us the difference between hurry and hospitality in this story, because these two sisters, Mary and Martha, they have very different views of how hospitality works, how life really works. So it says this right after that, verse 39. She had a sister, so Martha had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listening to what he said. Guys, I don't have time necessarily today maybe to get into this. Someday we'll talk about this more. I cannot overstate how important this verse is. For a woman to have sat at Jesus' feet. Do you know what this means? Do you know what sitting at his feet means? That means that she was sitting in the posture and the position of the disciples. To sit at the Lord's feet, or your Lord's feet at this time, or your rabbi's feet, literally meant you were being taught as a disciple, as an actual disciple of that rabbi. This was a position that women were not supposed to ever be in. Yet Mary decides she's one of the guys. And she sits at the Lord's feet, and notice this, he seems pretty cool with it. This is a huge deal. We miss this all the time. This statement is massive. And she sits at the Lord's feet, meaning she's one of the disciples, and she's just listening to what Jesus says. As he teaches, as he talks, she's just taking it all in. This is a huge statement. But Martha doesn't see it this way. Martha was distracted, notice that word, distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Right? And some of you are like, I've been there. Like, you're the only one after Thanksgiving who's like, guys, we have a lot of dishes. Anybody? Nope, football's on? Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Some of you understand exactly what she's feeling like. But the word here that's fascinating to me is the word distracted. It's the word parasio. And this word actually in the Greek means to be pulled apart. To be pulled apart. To be pulled in different directions. Now, all of us know how that feels, right? Every single one of us knows how that feels. She's feeling pulled apart in two different directions. Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. And let me say this really quickly. Before we start to think what I need to do in my week now, or what I need to do in my life, is I need to slow down. And I'm all for slow down spirituality. I'm for that idea. It's very important. I'm not saying it's wrong. But before you start thinking that, notice the thing that can't be cut out is the time with Jesus. Before you start thinking I need to slow down and you start taking things away, notice what we see of Mary. The one thing that's most important to her is that she's with Jesus. That's the one part that can't be cut out. In fact, you need to cut other things out to make that happen. But Martha is pulled in all these directions. She wants to be at the feet of Jesus possibly, but she knows there's a lot to do. She knows that she wants to show hospitality, this presence and this time, but she feels like there's so much going on. And she's pulled in these different directions. We live so much of our life like this. Don't we? There's always this feeling of being overhurried, overcrowded, constantly noisy. Just our lives are full of that stuff. Let me just talk about it for just a quick second. And if you're a note taker, here's a few thoughts I've got. And these are just my generic thoughts as I think about this. As I think about this restaurant that I'm sitting in, as I think about this life that we're living in, I think about the way that these things work. And for me, I see that my life, probably like yours, is just overcrowded. There's just too much going on. I feel this a lot personally, that I just make too many things try to happen all at the same time, right? We think that we're supposed to multitask. That's what we're taught. The truth is you actually can't, like literally your brain, you can't multitask. Even multitasking is a myth unto itself. Multitasking came from an idea that a computer could run more than one program at a time. That's not true. Actually, a computer, I don't care what computer you have, it only runs one thing at a time. It just does it really fast. But it's still running one sequence at a time. Same with you and I. We are really only designed to run one thing at a time. Guys, we're a little better at this sometimes just because we're not real bright. And so we can really only focus on one thing at a time. That's just kind of how we work. And then you have, again, the boxes that a guy's in. And you're like, have your box where you're like, I do this thing. And then I work here. This is where I work. And then I come to home and I have to close that box and open up this box. Like those are good. Like that's how we work a little bit. Ladies, I don't know how your mind works. I'll never understand how your mind works, but I know it's got a lot going on in it. And we have a real hard time saying we're only going to do one thing at a time when we want to do all the things at a time. And in a world that wants us to do everything at once, it's going to be impossible. It's just going to be impossible. We cannot. We had this idea. What we do is I think we confuse busyness for productivity. There's a confusion between the two things. If I'm busy, I must be being productive. That is not true. In fact, there are studies upon studies. If you read the Ruthless Elimination Hurry, John Mark Comer cites a study that actually says that we only can do about 50 hours of work a week. And after that, our productivity actually goes down. That you can do 50 hours and you can be very productive during those 50 hours. You have diminishing returns after 50 hours a week. You're literally less productive than you were before. It's almost as if God wired into us that we should like work 6 days or 50 hours a week and then have a day of rest. I'm just saying. It's almost like that's in there somewhere, right? The 50 hours, that's when it ends. But we start to think that busyness and productivity are the same thing. I would say what we use in our culture today is we use busyness as a way to cover up our brokenness. We want to be busy all the time because if we're constantly moving, we don't have to stop. We don't have to think about or hear about the things that are really going on inside of us. If you're like me, this is the way I want my life to work sometimes, is if I just keep moving, I don't have to sit still long enough to have God speak to me, to have others speak to me, to hear what's going on inside of me. If you're in that spot, I would encourage you, for me, every single morning, that's my time. I get up and I work out early in the morning, and then afterwards I have a couple hours before anybody in my house is moving because my wife's a really good sleeper and she's trained our kids to be really good sleepers, and even my son now understands not to talk to me right away in the morning. which is just a smart move for any introvert that you live with. Just don't talk to them first thing in the morning. They'll like you so much more. And so I have my time. That's my time. There's an old adage that the first 2 hours of your day and the last single hour of your day are the only time that you really control in your day. And to take control of those times, to actually listen to what's going on inside of you, to journal or to read or to meditate, that's what it's there for. I think it's so funny that meditation is like this weird lost art form that like Christians almost feel like is like some Buddhist thing or somebody else owns it now, where it's very much like, no, I think that was designed and actually practiced by Jesus like quite a bit. If you do not meditate, meditation is the listening side of prayer. So we all want to go pray and we talk to God a whole lot. We don't listen to him almost ever, if you've noticed. And I think he's got some things to say sometimes. We're like, my turn. Hey, oh man, okay. Like I think he wants to get back at us and he wants to talk with us too. We just don't listen. Have some time in your day where you're literally meditating, where that means you're listening for God. That's hugely important. But we want to get busier and busier because it covers up our brokenness. That's the way that it works for us. The more we have going on, more activity, the less we have to listen. Also, we live a life at this time that is, I think, the noisiest life we've ever lived. Again, just like that restaurant, there's just constantly noise in our lives. And if you ever have read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, he talks about a kingdom of it would be the hell kingdom in what he's writing about. But I love his terminology for it. He never calls it hell. He calls it the kingdom of noise. And doesn't that sound like hell? Again, if you're an introvert like me, it does. Where you're like, I don't want to be in a place where it's just constantly noisy all the time. I picture a middle school cafetorium. A middle school cafetorium. That's what I picture. Yes, not a cafeteria or an auditorium, a cafetorium. You know the one I'm talking about. That's what I picture, is a middle school cafetorium, just of noise. And you're like, that's what hell is. And it would be. And that's what he sees it as, is just that much noise. And we live in such a society of noise all the time. There's a great TED Talk that just happened by a guy named Ricky Case Hirschway. I'm sorry for trying to butcher that. And I cannot spell it for you. If you want me to spell you his name, I cannot. It's impossible. But Ricky Case Hirschway, he does a podcast called Song Exploder. I love it. And he takes apart songs with musicians. And he did this TED Talk just recently that I love because he was talking about what he's learned about listening. As he's learned about listening to music and listening to other artists, what has he learned about listening? And one of the things he said is, what I've learned is I cannot talk to one artist about their song if I have another song playing in the back of my head. And how many times do we sit with people and we're hearing their story, their song, and the whole time we have a whole nother set of thoughts, stories, songs in the back of our head? How many times have we done that? For me, it's a lot. And even when I sit with my kids, I'm thinking about the things that are going on in my pocket, like on your phone, or the things you're missing at that moment, or where else you could be. Even with my own children, I have that battle. Again, I know I'm the only one. But this noise has become so deafening that we almost don't know how to listen to anything else anymore. We don't have the gift of presence, the gift of time, because we're so inundated with noise from the world around us. And lastly, I think that we live lives that are just overly hurried. They're just hurried. Corrie ten Boom once wrote that if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. And I think both are doing the same goal. You know what the goal is? To pull you away from God. And both are doing it. And for many of us, we are living lives where we are so overly busy that we're actually being unproductive, not just for our work, not just for our families, but for the kingdom of God. If you notice what's happening here is Martha is so many of us where she's being pulled in multiple directions at the same time. She's being pulled in multiple places. She doesn't want to just stay still. For me, it's every time, oh guys, have you ever turned off the badges on your phone? It is life-changing. Like, do you know the badges that come up and it says like there's a little red 1, or sometimes if you're real popular, like a red 2. I'm not that cool. And it says how many messages you've missed, how many emails you have, how many Facebook posts that people have commented on, whatever it is. If you ever turn those off, it's crazy that actually that thing demands so much from you and gives you so little in return. and to turn those things off is so life-giving. I'm just saying, these are just ideas. The notifications on your phone, when those go away, it is crazy what can happen. If you wear things like this, like turning off like those devices from all the different things that it can alert you to, I don't need to know these things. I don't need to be up on all these things. To be able to have an actual life where I have the gift of presence and time is central to the gospel message. And Jesus fully affirms this. Notice what he says. Verse 41, Martha, Martha. It's like a Brady Bunch situation. That was Marcia, right? Marcia. Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things. Notice you're pulled in so many directions. But few things are needed, or indeed, only one. There's actually only one thing that matters. And Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. She chose better. She chose better. For many of us, it's so hard to make these choices. Yesterday, I was out watching my son play baseball, and my struggle with this has been well documented, of watching him play baseball. And again, Oliver and I see things very differently, and I wish I had the heart that he has. But I'm like an Enneagram 3, and I'm like, we have things to do, and you need to win the game, and maybe, be meaner a little bit or something, like just try a little bit more and run faster and hit harder, all the things. And he's like just having the time of his life out there, watching butterflies and trying to hug people. And so I appreciate it. It's great. I'm learning to be more patient. But yesterday we had a moment at the end of the game. He got up and it was his turn to hit. And I was sitting there watching because I'm thinking, I knew the lineup, and I was thinking, okay, he's coming up next, and I'm ready for that, and I've got the camera ready because I'm going to film him, and not even just to remember the moment. I'm filming like I shouldn't admit this stuff. I'm filming because I'm like, we're going to watch your technique later. It's not good. It's not good, guys. I got real problems. I'm working through them. And so I have my phone ready, and he's not coming out to the plate. He's nowhere near the plate. And I'm looking around for him, like, where is he? And he's over in the dugout still. And he's got all his stuff on, but he's talking to somebody. I'm like, oh no, Oliver. And I'm like yelling, like, Oliver, get over there. And Marie, who is, again, more like Oliver than like me, she looks at me, she's like, he's comforting somebody. I was like, what was he doing? He's getting out of there and bat. And she was like, no, the kid before him struck out, and he's very sad about it. I was like, yeah, but that's his problem. And Oliver's supposed to get up there and hit the ball, and it's his turn to go hit. He needs to get up there and hit. And he's like, well, he's comforting his friend. And so after the game, Oliver got up and he got a hit. Guys, I just want to be clear. Yeah, we are at 2 games in a row. This is a streak. 2-game hitting streak is where we're at right now. It's a streak. We never get another one, but we are on a streak right now. And so he got up, he hit the ball, everything went great. He ran to first, and everything went really well. But after the game, I was talking to him. We're walking to the car, and I was like, hey, buddy, before you got up to hit, you weren't there. Your coach was looking for you. I was looking for you. I didn't know where you were. And I said, you were talking to your friend, and next time you probably need to hurry out there. And I kid you not, Oliver looked at me, and this is just the kid I have. He looked at me, he was like, Dad, he's like, which one's more important, friends or the game? And he goes, easy, it's friends. I'm like, you guys stop. I'll take his side on this. And I was like, you're right. And I was like, but the thing that got me, it wasn't even his answer. It was that he clearly had priorities in line. See, what happens when we start to live this life of hurry is we confuse urgence with importance. What is urgent is not always important. And what's important is not always urgent. In that moment, he knew 100% which was more important. He knew there was something more urgent. That was getting up to bat. That was more urgent. But what was more important? He had such a clearly defined hierarchy. For so many of us, we might have to sit down and actually say, is what I'm doing with my time, is it important or is it just urgent? I'm the worst at this. I just want to be clear about it. I'm terrible at this. I'm terrible at prioritizing these things. I literally have to do it almost every single day. I have to make a list because I'm so bad at it. The other day, we were leaving for a trip. Marie was like, hey, I need you to pack. That's like all I need you to do to get us ready to go. And I was like, oh, totally. And she was like, I'm going to be gone for a couple hours. But when I get back, if you're packed, we're ready to go. I was like, perfect. I'll definitely be packed. And then she came back home, and I had mowed the lawn, and I was outside pressure washing. Why was I pressure washing our house? We did not need to happen that day. Urgence and importance, not the same thing. And she was like, great, did you pack? And I was like, no, but look at the house. She's like, we're leaving. We need to leave. We need to go. This is the problem. And so for many of us, we confuse the two. If you put things in order of importance, not just urgency, but importance, then that will change everything. Mary clearly chose what was better. She knew what was important, not just what was urgent. Martha was living a life of what was urgent, not what was important. For many of us, we have to define these things to be able to be people who are hospitable, to be people who aren't just hurried, but we have hospitality, because hurry and hospitality cannot both coexist, but they are central to the gospel message. As we close today, if you would stand with me, we're going to sing about this. And I actually would love it for you to actually, these words literally mean this exact thing. And I want to give you just a second. And maybe what you need to do is sing. Maybe what you need to do is prioritize a few things and think about what this looks like. If you're really meeting the need of the urgent or if you're meeting the need of the important. Maybe think about the areas of your life that are too overcrowded, the areas of your life that are too noisy, the area of your life that's too hurried. Maybe you need to think about what that looks like for you. And we need to be people who can actually show hospitality to our neighbors, to our friends, to our families around us, because it's central to the gospel message. As a church, that's our hope, is we want to be people who are seen as a place of hospitality. That's why we're doing things like block parties and blocking off our own time to be there. That's why we spend time praying for one another and meeting in groups. And I know that they're not the most convenient things, but they're the most important things. And so as you go through those things, as you spend time on that, would you start to whittle away the things that don't matter and start to look at the things that do? Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you for your example. We thank you for the hospitality that was shown to you and that you teach us what it looks like. And Jesus, we pray that we would first and foremost find time for you, that we would spend time at your feet learning from you every single day, that would be the first thing we do. And from that point, God, I pray that you would put everything in order of importance, not just urgency. That you would help us to define what is just noise and what's music, what is just hurry and what is productivity. Would you help us to define those things in our lives? We pray that you would put those things in order for us so that we can put you first and we can put others second, that we would in fact love you with all of our hearts, with our minds, with our souls, with our strength, and we would be kind and loving to the neighbors around us. We love you and thank you for loving us first. In Jesus' name, amen.
Here is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to, do whatever you want to. And I will make room for you. to do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. Here is where I lay it down.
I want to encourage you to kind of just hang out over in this area. Go see Katie at the Connection Desk. Go pray with Billy. Visit Krista and learn more about how you can partner with Better Together. We're so thankful that you're here with us this morning. We hope you have a great week, and as always, we're around, so come chat.